It has been a week. Historic Senate victories, the highest ever death toll for COVID-19 in our country, and the storming of our Capitol building in Washington, D.C. by armed people looking to overturn the outcome of the most recent presidential election. And that was only Wednesday. So this is a hard week, which I feel like I say every week as we gather, in the midst of a hard season. And so we continue to live with integrity as best as we can. We do what we can to not let anger and fear have the last word in our hearts. We take care of our bodies. We take care of one another. We keep taking all the precautions we need to keep ourselves as healthy as we can be. And we love the part of the world that is within our reach to love. It might not be enough. We can't know if it is enough, but it's what we can do. And we return to the sources of meaning and strength that we have, which include, I hope, this gathering. So come, let us gather. Come, let us connect to community, to shared values, to truth. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning. I'm Tim Bardick, and I'm here in my role as a member of the Sunday Services Committee. And I'd like to welcome all of you to People's Church this morning. A special welcome to anyone who happens to be visiting this Zoom service, and we hope it helps support you in living a life that carries out the promise of justice. People's Church is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and we're part of a long tradition of liberal religion. Among other things, liberal religion means that we believe we need to go beyond saying the right words about morality and justice to doing the right deeds. The People's Church Bond of Union that members sign ends with the following line, quote, "We base our union upon no creed test, but welcome all who wish to join us to establish truth, righteousness, and love in all the world." That bond of union was adopted in 1892. Historically, it was part of what was then perceived as a radical movement within what was then called the Western Unitarian Conference. And that radical movement was to admit people of any theology as long as they were devoted to good deeds in this world. You can find similar statements from this period from many Unitarian churches in the Midwest that were part of the Western Unitarian Conference. One of the leaders of this 19th century movement was a minister named Jenkins Lloyd Jones. He happened to edit the main publication of the Western Unitarian Conference for many years. In the 1880s, Jenkins Lloyd Jones took over as minister of the Fourth Unitarian Church in Chicago. He shortly thereafter had it renamed All Souls Church. And he had the church adopt a bond of union in the 1880s that included the following familiar line, quote, "We join together to promote truth, righteousness, and love in the world." In 1886, the Western Unitarian Conference scandalized the New England Unitarians by adopting the following statement, quote, "The Western Unitarian Conference conditions its fellowship on no dogmatic test, but welcomes all who wish to join it to establish truth, righteousness, and love in the world," unquote. So our church back in 1892 was following an emerging tradition, which was perceived by some at the time as radical, that said, what really matters is what we do to establish truth, righteousness, and love in the world. So let us therefore welcome all who are willing to act to fulfill that goal, regardless of what they may happen to believe about God or the gods. Today, let us continue to examine our deeds to make sure that we are fulfilling that promise of right action.
Good morning. Each time we sing together, I invite you to find a posture, either sitting or standing, that makes it easy for you to breathe and sing along, or feel free to just listen. Our first song is Dona Nobis Pacem.
Okay, the chalice lighting today is by Rebecca Savage. We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people, united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This, a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals.
And now a story or a reflection for all of us of all ages. I learned not too long ago that after animals have survived something scary, maybe a larger animal was trying to eat them and they escaped, they shake their bodies like this. And that helps get the fear or the anger or the worry or whatever emotions were in their bodies out of their bodies. So they're calm enough to be able to avoid the next predator that comes along. I've been thinking about that a lot this week because I, perhaps like you, have been feeling more anger and fear and worry than I usually do. If you haven't, if you haven't been feeling more of those hard emotions this week, that might be something to check in with too. Maybe the feelings are too strong to really feel and you're going to a numb place. I'd encourage you to ask yourself, if the events of this week happened 5 years ago, how would your heart be? But we live with anger and fear and worry, sometimes from big things and sometimes from smaller things. At my house this week on Friday, we had our 2-year-old lock herself in a bedroom by herself. So we had to try to negotiate with her to unlock. And then we broke down the door to get her free. And my 5-year-old, a few hours later, fell into a stream on a cold walk. So we had a lot of strong feelings still in our bodies after all of that. And because when I'm parenting, I can't really say I need to go meditate for 20 minutes, see you later, because there might be more locks in bedrooms or something like that, we have started turning to dancing. We have had so many dance parties at my house this week because it helps us be like those animals who shake their bodies and get the anger and the fear and the worry out. Not all the way out. It doesn't make everything better, but it helps it be not the first thing in the front of our mind all day. It helps us pay attention to all of the other things that might need to be paid attention to. And so I offer that to you. I invite you to dance through these hard days. Or maybe you're someone who runs or does other things, aerobics, all kinds of ways to move our bodies. But if you don't have a movement practice, I invite you, when it feels really hard, to put on a song that you love and dance. And some of that fear and some of that anger and some of that worry might just be shaken out of your body so you're ready for the next time and you can continue to act out of your own integrity. It doesn't fix it, and I don't actually want you to go out in the world this week with no fear or anger or worry in your body, because these are outraging times, and we need to keep it calibrated so it's just enough and not overwhelming. And that is hard. So that's my reflection for all of us. Be a little bit more like the small animals who've escaped a predator. And a few times today, you're going to hear me say that our work continues to be to love parts of the world that are within reach. One of the ways that we do that is with our money. And one of the people and organizations who are loving our community in inspiring ways are Open Doors and their executive director, Stephanie Hoffman. So they are helping to move people from homelessness into housing and home ownership in inspiring and supportive and holistic ways. So now we're going to hear a video from Stephanie talking a little bit about their work. And I invite you all, if you are able, to give generously to support the work of Open Doors.
Greetings, People's Church family. I'm Stephanie Hoffman, Executive Director of Open Doors Kalamazoo. I said it to you all before, I still feel the same. I believe we are one of the best nonprofits on the earth. You'll see I tweaked it a little bit and said one of. In years past, I said the best. But there are so many tremendous organizations doing powerful work, and we have the opportunity to partner with those organizations today. And so I'm so grateful to be here with you all. Open Doors, as like everyone else, experienced tremendous changes in 2020. By the way, you all, we made it. We made it into 2021. And what a blessing, what a gift to be here with you all this morning. As I was saying, Open Doors, we experienced some tremendous changes and and opportunities of growth, even during the pandemic. What this time taught us is that many systems and regulations that were in place were not always just, even with open doors, and always not necessary. And because of the pandemic, we were able to make drastic, urgent changes that, one, put people first. People first. I believe that we have always had people first, but this pandemic caused us to go inward and really assess who we want to be as an organization. And so we've made the choice to work at becoming an anti-racist organization, to really embody anti-racism. And that is a powerful statement. For some on our board and our staff, that's a scary statement, because what does that mean for them personally and professionally? But I am here to say, as the executive director and working on an anti-racism team, we are going to do our part in making sure that Kalamazoo County becomes that beloved community that we all talk about, dream about, and aspire to be. So thank you, People's Church, for all that you have done, not only for Open Doors, but for our entire community. I know that you all are doing wonderful works in all sorts of sectors. I want to give a special shout out to Reverend Rachel for her support of me and pushing, I believe, for me to become a board member for the Foundation for Excellence. Thank you so much, sis. I appreciate you. I honor you. I just send peace and blessings to People's Church and all your families and members, and know that we would not be the community that we are becoming without you. God bless. I look forward to seeing you all in different spaces, and I hope 2021 we will be able to gather together in person. Sending you much love and light. Take care. Bye-bye.
The music for the offering is Dedication by Enrique Granados.
I'd like to invite you to join me in reading the words for giving thanks. From the countless gifts we each have been given, gifts of life and love and sustenance, we bring these small portions to share in the works of love which none of us can accomplish alone.
Hello and welcome to our meditation today. Today we're going to use some techniques from the book My Grandmother's Hands by Renshaw Mannequin. He guides us in techniques on how to move strong emotions and trauma through our bodies so that they don't remain stuck there. Let us begin with just centering our breath with 3 deep breaths to center in our body. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in, and breathing out, I know I am breathing out. Breathing in, my breath grows deep. And breathing out, my breath grows slow. Breathing in, I dwell in the present moment. And breathing out, I know that this is a wonderful moment. As we take a moment to settle into our bodies, I invite you to just do a brief body scan, starting with the top of your head. And just bring your awareness and your attention to your head and scan downwards, noticing your eyes, your jaw, your neck, your shoulders. Notice if there are any places that are tight or tender. Breathe a deep breath in, inviting some spaciousness and relaxation to those tight or tender places. Continue scanning down your arms, out through your fingertips, your chest, and your back. Your buttocks where they sit on the chair, your legs. Pay special attention to your joints, your hips and your knees and your ankles, as this is are places in our body where things tend to be stored. If you feel the need to move your hips a little bit or roll your foot, release any energy out of there, I invite you to do so. And now I invite you to place your hand on your body in some place that might feel comforting. He recommends the back of the neck, which is the top of the vagus nerve, can provide a lot of comfort and grounding, or over your heart, or especially right at your solar plexus, right on your belly. Just place a hand somewhere that feels comforting to you and hold it there for a couple of breaths. Notice how you feel when you do that. Next, he offers the idea of maybe patting or rubbing your belly. Does that motion provide some comfort, or your heart, or maybe cupping your face? Whatever feels right for you, just notice what it feels like to hold tight or to rub or to pat an area of your body that could use a little tender, loving care right now. He also suggests a way to help move strong emotions through our bodies is by humming a tune. It could just be a random hum. It could be a favorite tune that provides comfort for you. Rubbing, patting, holding, just providing some places of comfort, release. And as you do this, just notice whatever is true for you, whatever is present, whatever arises in your heart, in your body, in your mind. Are you able to release and let go? When you've traveled out in the forest for a quiet meditation and you notice a tractor driving through, do you become attached to the way that you wanted things to be, or able to just let go and let things be simply as they are? And with that, I invite your attention. You can put your hands down if you wish and come back to your breath. Come back to this present moment with as much tenderness and curiosity and compassion for yourself and for all beings. May these practices help restore us, move trauma and strong emotions through our bodies and our hearts, so that we may act from our deepest place of love, of loving kindness and compassion, to help build the beloved community together. Blessed be.
Our first poem is by Marcus Wicker. He's a contemporary Black American poet who was raised in Ann Arbor. He now teaches at the University of Memphis. Reparations redefinition. Bond. Noun, a uniting or binding element or force. The thing about facing your fears head on is it only really works on TV. As an example, let's say a clawfoot bathtub teeming with arachnids is your garden variety anti-fantasy. Now, say the sitcom Dad and You gets the itch to do something experiential, something special for your 40th. Stay with me. So you willingly dive into a pool of 10,000 tarantulas head first. In the Fear Factor version of this midlife episode, Ludacris is like, man, white people are crazy. In reality, this sounds like a frightful headache, 6 ibuprofen and stitches. Like 80,000 eyeballs all up in your situation, if you catch my drift. And I bet the last thing you need is a group of hairy climbers and their many-legged offspring ogling your property, sniffing up the old oak tree after the acorns you squirreled away for the fam when the market was healthy. Square any beef between two parties and you'll find money lurking somewhere near the root. Of evil and fear, Aristotle claimed, pain arises from the untoward bracing. He strikes me as a particularly anxious dude. Extreme fear can neither fight nor fly, but comply, I think Shakespeare implied. The thing about facing your fears head on is your head and the knowledge of history. From an aerial vantage, a battlefield of sun-blanched skulls resembles one psychedelic mushroom patch. Can you see the speckled gecko playing hide and seek with the ravenous Komodo dragon, weaving through 2 million cavernous eye sockets? If it helps, you may think of this figure as figurative, a literal marker in the definition's landscape, representing blacks slain during the transatlantic slave conquest. Or perhaps Greek tragedy begets your literary empathy. When Ray Parker Jr. sang, "I ain't afraid of no ghost," he didn't account for the great-great-granddaddy apparition of social studies. My fear of history is a valid fear of power, stripped, lorded over, misguided, corrupting one's sense of need in favor of excess, head to head, bird to nest. I'm saying I understand what steers our national stasis, our fossilized political animals, and I forgive us. As an example of forgiveness, let's say I had money to produce this 40 acres and a mule script with Spike Lee. As in reality, the narrative's of little consequence. But peep the plot twist ending. Marcus, our handsome protagonist attorney, stay with me, wins a class action suit to the tune of lifetime therapy for everybody.
Our next poem is by Lucy Shaw. Lucy Shaw is a white poet and naturalized citizen of the U.S. She was born in London, lives in Bellingham, Washington, and is a writer in residence at Regent College in Vancouver, Canada. So here is Lucy Shaw's poem, Emergence. So the town grew, and they built us a new bridge over the stream, and later diverted the flow to an underground tunnel, like a long worm into which the city shoveled its leaves and garbage, slowing the current and turning it rank with mud and rats, murky, invisible. People forgot the old brook with its little fish and tadpoles and green reeds and its ripples conversing with the sun. Until last week, a great storm of rain and winds blew open our windows and our memories, and the water burst through and spread itself across the city in a great sheet and said, "Remember me?"
The next piano piece is called Remembrance by W. Scott King.
Months ago, I selected the Tulsa race massacre of 1921 as our focus for today. There was a small part of me that thought it might be challenging to make this story matter to us now. How will I make this old story about a group of angry white people who disregarded the rule of law and used violence to maintain white supremacy relevant to today? And then Wednesday happened, and I should have remembered that stories of white anger when faced with the possibility of racial equity are always relevant, are always continuing to unfold. We have 500 years of similar stories on this continent. The genocide and dispossession of Native folks to this continent, enslavement of Africans, lynching, the burning and bombing of Black churches, the internment of Japanese Americans, and I'm sure each of you can add more to that list. This is part of who we are as a country. It's not all of who we are, but it is part of the stuff we carry in us, the stuff that steers our national stasis, that informs our politics, our relationships, and our hearts. So today, I'm mostly going to focus on the 100-year-old story, in part because I am still in a place of incoherent rage about Wednesday's events, and you all deserve so much more than yelling and expletives from your preacher today. And if what you need is yelling and expletives, I trust that you can find it for yourself or find it elsewhere, because there's surely no short supply of that in the world right now. And the old story matters because it helps explain how we got here. So 100 years ago, Greenwood was the main Black neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's important to remember that Tulsa was at the end of the Trail of Tears, the land that was supposed to be reserved for the indigenous people of the southeastern United States in perpetuity, forever. And so they were marched across states, and many died. And then that plan didn't last long. White people soon moved in, and that accelerated when oil was discovered. The wealth the oil generated spread to the Black community, and a whole parallel Black city was created because of segregation, with everything you might need in a city: doctors and dentists, movie theaters, stores, exclusively for the Black residents, because they weren't allowed in any of the places or any of the businesses for white people. By 1920, Greenwood was thought to be the wealthiest Black neighborhood in the country and was called the Negro Wall Street. Many were prosperous, and this segregated prosperity was not enough for everyone who lived there, especially the Black veterans of the First World War. They had fought abroad under the campaign to make the world safe for democracy, only to be treated worse than white people when they returned. They wanted equality, and part of their activism was demanding to march in the annual Memorial Day parades, and they were jeered by white spectators and white veterans. Meanwhile, a man named Richard Lloyd Jones purchased the Tulsa Tribune, one of the main white papers in town. Historians call him one of Tulsa's most vocal racists, and it was his words in the paper more than anything that incited the massacre that we're getting to. He published articles praising and recruiting for the Ku Klux Klan. And the name Lloyd Jones might sound familiar, either from Tim's opening words, or if you pay close attention to the history of Unitarian Universalism in general, or People's Church in particular. Richard Lloyd Jones was the son of Jenkin Lloyd Jones, who was among the most important Unitarian ministers at the end of the 19th century. As Tim named, he helped transform our faith from one Christian denomination among many into the pluralist tradition that it is now. He also championed and mentored the first generations of women ministers and spoke at Caroline Bartlett Crane's installation at what was not yet called People's Church of Kalamazoo in 1889. He wrote the texts that were the basis for our bond of union. Without Jenkin Lloyd Jones, People's Church would be very different today. And his son, Richard, was also a prominent Unitarian of the day. Even as he was running this racist newspaper, Richard Lloyd Jones was a founding member of All Souls Unitarian Church in Tulsa. He recruited folks for the church through his paper. And because history is complicated, All Souls Tulsa is now one of the largest and most racially diverse congregations in our tradition. So this is a complicated legacy that congregation grapples with. On Memorial Day 1921, tensions were high in Tulsa because Black veterans again had marched in the day's parade. That day, a young woman named Sarah Page was working as an elevator operator in a skyscraper downtown. A young white woman named Sarah Page. And a young Black man named Dick Rowland got on the elevator. He worked nearby shining shoes, and the only bathroom that he was allowed to use in the vicinity as a Black person was at the top floor of the skyscraper. On the ride back down after using the bathroom, Rowland grabbed Page's arm. He said it was an accident. He was falling and reached out to steady himself. She said it was assault and went to the police. The police interviewed them both and didn't think much of this interaction, and she declined to press charges. When Richard Lloyd Jones heard this story, he sensationalized it and published editorials about it. The paper the next afternoon included the front page headline, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator," and "To lynch Negro tonight." The other white paper in town didn't even run a story about this interaction because they didn't think it was newsworthy. After the first few hundred issues were printed, Jones's staff convinced him to remove the editorial in support of lynching, but the paper was already widely circulated in both white and Black communities in Tulsa. So that evening, about 1,000 white people assembled outside the county jail where Dick Rowland, the man who stumbled, was detained. People who were there said it felt like a church picnic with children running around and playing games and people eating the meals they'd brought. Meanwhile, some white men broke into the nearby National Guard armory to steal the guns stored there. A few leaders of Greenwood, the Black community, came to see the sheriff several times over the night, receiving his word that he would defend Rowland with his life. And during one of these visits, a white man approached a Black man and demanded the gun that the Black man was carrying. The Black man refused to hand it over, and the white man lunged for the weapon. It was discharged, and when the first shots were fired, everything erupted. Armed people of both races began shooting at each other. Many people were hit and some died. The Black people then fled back to their Greenwood neighborhood, followed by the white people, all of them shooting at each other. Gunfights continued throughout the night, mostly across the railroad tracks that separated the black and white sides of town. And in the early morning hours, white people set fires in Greenwood. They used violence and threats of violence to keep the fire department from entering the neighborhood. Residents of Greenwood tried to flee, but many were turned back, contained in the neighborhood, and the National Guard was deployed to the city. They patrolled the white neighborhood adjacent to Greenwood. They didn't want the violence and fire and destruction to spread into white neighborhoods. After daylight, the airplanes arrived. The small two-seater biplanes. There was a pilot and then someone in the back seat, sometimes an armed man shooting any black person they could see, some dropping balls of flaming turpentine. And when the massacre and fires were over, 34 square blocks had burned to the ground. The number of dead was unknown, in part because there wasn't much of an effort made to count them. Estimates made later range from 75 to 300, over 3/4 of them black. And 10,000 black residents of Tulsa became homeless that night because of the fires. Businesses were lost. Many people moved away because they couldn't stay in a place with so much pain and loss. And the message was communicated to Black people and others across the country about what might happen if you are successful, if you ask to be treated equally. No one was prosecuted for the violence of that night. Jones and other prominent white people in Tulsa quickly started telling stories about how the violence that night was necessary to defend the white community from a Black uprising, about how the most violent whites were low-class oil workers in from out of town. Never mind that poor folks from away would have not been able to get their hands on an airplane. Once the rubble cooled, Jones never wrote about these events in his newspaper again, and he went on to a prominent life as a civic leader in Tulsa and our faith. He became the vice president of the American Unitarian Association, one of the precursors to our Unitarian Universalist Association in the 1940s. For nearly a century, this history has been, at least for many white people, lost. It's like the stream in the poem Tim read earlier, buried, diverted, forgotten. Jamie posts in the chat about how she grew up outside of Tulsa and didn't hear this story. And then it comes roaring back in a storm of wind and rain. We saw some roaring last summer when President Trump planned to hold a rally in Tulsa on Juneteenth, a holiday celebrating emancipation. We catch glimpses of the buried and murky truth sometimes if we look hard for it. I learned this story of the Tulsa race massacre just a few years ago, and the Unitarian Universalist connection only a few months ago. It is no accident that many of us were not taught this story. Last year was the first year that it was required to be taught in Oklahoma schools. So we have to ask, who is served by ignoring the story of a prosperous Black community that was destroyed? Who is served by not telling the story of someone who shares our religious identity inciting violence? We need to sit with these questions. And I promised a story about, or a sermon about remembrance and reparations. So we'll talk a little about reparations. What does it look like to move towards reparations for this massacre? How do we get into something closer to right relationship? It starts with telling the truth. In 1996, the state legislature in Oklahoma authorized a commission to investigate the events I just described. They interviewed survivors, reviewed historical sources, and told the truest story possible 75 years later. Telling the truth matters about what happened 100 years ago and what happened Wednesday and what continues to happen over and over. And that is not enough. In addition to telling the history, the commission called for action, including direct payments to survivors and their descendants, scholarships, memorials, and economic development efforts in Greenwood. They also arranged for non-invasive efforts to search for mass graves of those killed and buried. The reparations the commission called for were not funded by the state, but a few others have stepped in. The General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association supported reparations in 2001. The following year, UU congregations in Tulsa, along with other religious communities in Tulsa and the UUA, started making payments to the remaining survivors of the massacre. The Tulsa Chamber of Commerce and other community organizations have also fundraised for this purpose. We know that money, especially money 80 years later, doesn't make everything fine. There is no dollar figure we can put to make up for the loss of life, the trauma of the massacre, the destruction of property. And money is a real acknowledgement. After decades of pretending that nothing happened that night in 1921, it is meaningful to say sorry with the tools we have. And money is one of the tools. I've been thinking a lot this week about the final scene in the poem from Marcus Wicker that I read earlier. The courtroom scene in the imagined movie about reparations. The class action lawsuit that wins and awards lifetime therapy to everyone. I would love to see where we end up after a lifetime of therapy for everyone. Because I think there is so much pain, so much anger, that we all need it so desperately, or some sort of care, whether it's therapy or something else. Because of course, the few remaining survivors of the Tulsa massacre need all the mental health care they can get, as do their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and everyone who survives and thrives as a Black person in this country. And folks who are Native and Latinx and Asian and multiracial, religious minorities, queer folks who exist every day in systems and societies that oppress them need care too. And the perpetrators of racial violence and their descendants and their communities need care and support if they're ever going to build a new way. And I want really excellent therapy for our Congress people and their aides and the custodians and everyone who works in the Capitol building, because their workplace was attacked this week. And then so many of them immediately went back to work. I hope they maybe had dance parties in their office or had chances to meditate, but we know that that kind of fear doesn't float away right away, and they're going to need care to be able to move through it. And I want care, therapy, support for the people that assaulted the Capitol building, because they clearly have some stuff they need to work out. They need to face those fears and anger in ways that don't just spread fear and anger to others. And we need that for the people who incited these insurrectionists as well. And I want therapy for the well-meaning white folks, people in the process of waking up to the truths of this country and trying to remove the supremacy systems from our own hearts when we don't even know the stories that we need to work through to get there. And we know that it isn't only therapy, although a lifetime of therapy feels like a good first start. It is learning. So mark your calendars for a Sunday devoted to microaggressions 3 weeks from today. But it's learning while remembering that a book list or a workshop is a starting point and not an ending point. It's relationships with folks who are our companions on these journeys, perhaps a little further along, who can lovingly call us on our nonsense and help us figure out how we need to grow. For people of color, it is having communities of support and solidarity. For white people, it is following the leadership of leaders of color and trusting them when they tell you their truth. For everyone, it is loving and repairing the parts of the world that is within reach, whether that's institutions that you're part of, your neighborhood, your family, or your heart. And I wish there was a way to end this triumphantly, but there is nothing triumphant about this. So in the face of 5 centuries of racism on this continent, much of the work is about being humble as well. Our efforts can't fix, won't fix what has happened. The efforts that we can make probably won't stop the next eruption of anger, of violent white supremacy. And we need to be able to live in our own integrity, repairing and loving as best we can. And on my good days, I can trust that that is enough, and that our efforts combined with so many other folks working to build a new way, will create a way of peace, a way of equity, a way of freedom, and a way of love. So may it be so. May we make it so, and amen.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a
So, dear ones, I send you out into the world or back into your kitchens or wherever you are with the hope that knowing a little bit more about how we got here might help us build a new way. Hopefully, by spending this time with people who share your values, you feel a renewed commitment and a renewed strength. And I hope you find ways to dance or find joy or breathe through these challenging days. So take good care of yourselves and love and repair the parts of the world that are within reach, even if it is just your own heart. Go in peace and go in love.